engine. Yes?
Mr. President, the Lippo Group hired your friend Webb Hubbell after he resigned in a scandal from the Justice Department and just a few months before he went to jail for embezzlement. So far, no one has been able to determine what kind of work he was doing or why he was paid a sum reportedly in excess of $200,000. Does anything about this arrangement strike you as unusual or suspicious? And given that there have been public suggestions this money was offered to encourage his silence before the Whitewater investigator, have you taken any steps yourself to assure yourself that this is not the case?
Well, first of all, I didn't know about it. To the best of my recollection, I didn't know anything about his having that job until I read about it in the press. And I can't imagine who could have ever arranged to do something improper like that, and no one around here know about it. It was just not, we did not know anything about it, and I can tell you categorically that that did not happen. I knew nothing about it. No, none of us did before it happened. And I didn't personally know anything about it until I read about it in the press. So I think when somebody makes a charge like that, there ought to be some burden on them to come forward with some evidence to substantiate their charge instead of saying, we'll make a charge, see if you can disprove it. That's not the way things work, and that's a pretty irresponsible charge to make without knowing, having some evidence of it. And I'm just telling you, it's not so.
Time he was covering the White House, John accumulated an incredible amount of knowledge. Part of the reason why he didn't write that many stories for the paper is a lot of what he does is just accumulate knowledge about how Washington works. He's kind of like the Hedrick Hertzberg of his generation. He knows the Washington power game. And so John recently wrote a piece in the Post telling the incoming Bush administration kind of the life lessons about how this city works, how Washington works, what he learned particularly about the Clinton administration and how they deal with the media, how they dealt with the media, the mistakes they made, the things they did right, the things they did wrong. Incredibly helpful. I happen to know from my sources in the Bush transition, it is considered required reading.
I'm sure.
Secretary Cheney, Vice President-elect Cheney has passed it around and told everybody, this is the manual, this is how we'll deal with the press. But there's an important thing for the White House to know. Even though John is leaving the White House full-time, he will be around, he will be covering the building. And it's important that the Bush White House know how to deal with John. So we're going to give you some tips for those of you listening to this, watching this, who are associated with the Bush administration. Here's the way you should think about how to deal with John Harris. Bill?
We have a couple of suggestions. I think the most important thing, as the Clinton administration has found, is sucking up to John in terms of supporting his alma mater. So Mark and I are thinking, we've got this big surplus. It probably is a good idea for the president-elect to devote maybe all of that to Carleton College.
Just wall it off, kind
Absolutely.
of a lockbox for
Absolutely.
Carleton College.
Rather than spending it on a tax cut, because we feel like that would be a good way to really ingratiate themselves to John. Point two, sort of similar and related. The president-elect and his team might think about having someone in a senior staff role who has some close personal relationship to John. That seemed to work for the Clintons, like maybe a college roommate, something like that, just a thought. Thirdly, John has some rather unusual traveling habits.
Travel needs.
For those of us like myself and Mark, who've traveled with him over the years. I might suggest for the incoming press staff that under all the tables in the filing centers, you might have cots, because John has a hard time, particularly on foreign trips, kind of figuring out what time it is. And there's a famous incident from when he went with President Clinton to China where he just fell asleep underneath the table in the filing center. So
better there be a cot there.
Absolutely, that's a thought. Finally, John's wardrobe and travel accoutrements are a little bit different than some of his traveling colleagues. So we're thinking, rather than embarrass him or make him feel different, what the incoming administration might do is just have a blanket rule that anyone who travels with the president has to have a canvas duffel bag that they stuff all of their clothes in, sort of like the thing that the manager of a high school hockey team would have, to have all the sticks and things like that. I think that might make a difference.
Got a couple of recommendations. First of all, John is meticulous about his sourcing. And by that I mean he basically finds the 3 or 4 people who are completely disloyal to the president, who will talk endlessly about process, and he'll use them as blind quotes over and over again. He'll prey on your outside consultants. My recommendation, just give John from the day one home numbers, pagers, cells, spouses' names and birthdays. Just hand it all over. It's silly to resist. He's going to call him, he's going to talk to him. Might as well hand those over. And along those same terms, John's obsessed with process. John doesn't care about clothing any new children, feeding any hungry children,
No issues
housing.
at all.
Doesn't care about you. Process, process, process. And of course, President-elect Bush and his associates, they hate those stories. But again, you will be powerless to fight. You will walk out of meetings and your associates will be racing to the phone to call John to tell him what happened. My recommendation, just have John at the meetings. I don't see a conflict with that. Mrs. Graham, Ben Bradley, they're still running the paper, I think. Totally fine with them. Just save a room at the table for John.
Even beyond that, maybe we can close with this. The president-elect, like most people, maybe when he gets up in the morning thinks, how am I feeling today? How's my mind today? What's on my mind today? I mean, the good news is with John still involved in covering Washington, he won't have to worry about that because it'll be regularly printed in the Washington Post. Because John has this innate ability, sort of a telepathic ability, I think some of the Clinton folks thought, to be able to read the mind of the president. So President Bush, President-elect Bush, that won't have to be something he's concerned about at all.
John, nice job at the White House. Your anniversary, your actual close date will actually come when you finish that final round of expenses, so we'll check back with you in just a few months.
Congratulations, John, though. I thought you'd stop covering the White House 2 or 3 years ago, but in any case, best of luck.
John Harris is a great reporter, perhaps the greatest White House reporter around, and for that reason, we here want to keep him involved in covering the White House for the longest time that we can. I'm not sure John knows that because every time I try to go over to his desk, I can't get close to it because of all the crap all over the floor and the papers and the files, and in fact, you can't tell, but this knee is bandaged from the latest fall of tripping over the files that he was compiling for the Clinton Legacy. I've tried to leave him notes, sort of send them over airplane-esque, but I don't think that he can ever find them in the piles. And you know, there's been times I've tried to call him on the cell phone to tell him just how great I think he is, but he's lost 4 cell phones in the last year. And then, of course, I thought, well, I could beep him and tell him, but there's 9 pagers that have been lost. Well, maybe only 7. 2 could be buried on his desk. And I've tried to show my appreciation to John by sending gifts to Anne and Liza and now the new baby, but they've already outgrown them before they even receive them because they're buried under the 1997 Clinton files somewhere. Although I did find one recent gift for Liza in the waste can, but it really wasn't a waste can. John was actually explained to me he was using it to file materials. And then, of course, I would always like to be able to tell John after he files how really nice the work he did, what a great job he did. But, of course, there's this problem because John tends to file just as we're about to miss deadline for the first edition. And, you know, by the time I'm finished, you know, there's no time left to talk with John because I really would like to go home and have 2 or 3 hours of sleep before I come back the next day. But I'm sure, you know, none of this do we here view as anything but contributing to John's greatness. And
I guess the biggest adjustment I'll have to make is not so much President Clinton leaving office, but I won't be talking to John Harris another 5 or 6 times a week yet. John, I remember, as we all do, I was very close to Ann Devereaux. I don't know what happened there. It was always thought that no one could fill Ann's shoes. And the truth of the matter is you didn't. No. I don't think anybody could have thought that they could be a successor to Ann, and everybody would think would be a journalist on level with her. And you certainly have accomplished a lot in filling in for one of the great journalists, and I think you'll be remembered as someone who brought the readers of your newspaper a lot of insight into this White House and into this president. We've argued and screamed, fought. In all those 6 years that I've dealt with you, I never knew you just like with Ann Devereaux. You've never burned me, you've never quoted me out of context, you've never misquoted me, you've never quoted me when I asked not to be quoted, you've never quoted me blindly when I asked not to be quoted. And if you have a relationship like that with someone, that's great. When you can add to it, that I think we've developed a good friendship over the last 6 years. I'm sorry to see President Clinton go, and I'm sorry to see that you're going to be covering something else. I guess we'll still be kind of mutually involved in politics, but we will miss you, and best of luck to you.
John, I know that as you leave the White House, you've been very concerned about what kind of a legacy you've left behind as a White House reporter, and I just wanted to talk to you about that today. And I know that you've been very sensitive about your coverage. I know every night at 11 o'clock when you go on the web to see what New York Times is writing for the next day, anticipating that inevitable call from your editor about what story you've missed, that it's really made you nervous that you won't have a legacy. And I also know as you channel surf every night at midnight and flipping around how frustrating it is for you when you see Tom Squatore on Hardball and Ron Williams on Fox and Jim Warren on Geraldo, and I know it drives you crazy when you see Rick Burke on Charlie Rose, and and Howard Kurtz, he got his own show, and well, we're not even going to go there on that. But what you should know is that hundreds and hundreds of people watch you each week on Washington Week in Review, and many of those folks are still alive. But you have had a lasting impact on coverage of the White House as a White House beat reporter, and I know your colleagues have learned a lot from you, and many of them have told me that every morning they would go to the Post and look up in 826 and try to find your article to see what you'd done that day, because they felt that they could learn a lot from you. So I jotted down here what I call the Harris rules, your lasting impact for your colleagues to help them when they cover the White House in the future. First one is always cover process, never cover policy. Secondly, everything in the White House is done with political motivations. It's always there. All you have to do is find it. Always be generous on your sourcing. You can say aides close to the president, senior advisors, associates who have spoken to the president. Always build up your sources and make them look good. I think it's also very important, and I think you've taught people that it's always important in every one of your articles to speculate on what the president is thinking. And it's also important, I think, in your articles to speculate about what the president is feeling. That's always, I think, helpful for you. And every story has a polling angle. All you have to do is find it. You just have to look for it and find it. And I think when you're writing a story, you should always think about Gail Sheehy, Dick Morris, and Dr. Joyce Brothers. In every story you write, at least one of those three people has to find the story interesting. And if they don't, it's probably not a very good story to write. And when you're talking to a source, always tell them that this story is not going to be about psychobabble. Your editors made you do it. And then next week you go write a really long, interesting policy story that's going to make the administration look good. I think that will help your colleagues learn how to work the sources. And lastly, if you write a story and it doesn't generate buzz, then it's not worth writing, because that's really all that matters. So at the end of the day, I think it's quite remarkable what you're leaving behind for your colleagues, and I think it's even more remarkable when you think about it. I mean, you've done all this, and almost every one of your colleagues makes more money than you do, but you've still been able to do this in terms of leaving a legacy behind. So John, I'm going to miss your calls every morning or late in the day as you crash on a story that you hadn't worked on all day. But the reality is, you were a pretty damn good reporter, and I believe even old Ann Devereaux up there will look back at your work and say he's done a pretty damn good job.
I have to say my earliest memory of John Harris was Fajita-gate, which was a famous story that he missed. Probably the first of many, but certainly the most celebrated of those cases. Everyone in the know will know what the story is about, but it had to do with eating Mexican food when he should have been reporting on important comments by the president.
Wasn't it Howie Kurtz who broke that story?
Basically, everything that Kurtz has written over the last 6 years that had to do with Clinton and the White House press corps, as I understand it, came from Harris, because I never talked to him.
I wonder what he's going to do without John at the White House.
Well, you mean John has left the White House?
I thought John left the White House like 3 years ago, but according to Ann, he's just leaving now.
Oh, really? Yeah, no, I mean, he had advice for his successors on the White House beat. I don't remember what it was, but I guess it was to just try and get as close to your subjects as he did. And, you know, if you could find a Doug Sutton kind of character, you basically you got a free ride for 4 years. Yeah, that's basically your made guy, as Harris was. I thought he'd gone into food writing or something like that, restaurant reviewing.
I thought he took that chair in Clinton Studies at Crawl.
That's probably where the recommendation that the surplus be devoted to college came from.
I wasn't there, but I heard he was talking about it at Sally's Ben's at the end of the year. He was going to go out there for the spring semester.
I'm sure that it would improve the quality of the faculty markedly to have somebody there who actually already had a college degree and some years of experience in the real world.
And after all this talk in recent months about Harris fatigue setting in Washington,
I know
like he just needed it.
personally, I'm beginning to suffer from some Harris nostalgia. You know,
Really?
Harris was the first to identify
you always were ahead of the curve.
the Clinton nostalgia factor, which lasted for several weeks, but the polls show that it still is a factor. And I sense some Harris nostalgia setting in around Washington too, because there will never be another White House reporter like him.
Yeah, that's true. His keen fashion sense was really brought a certain flair.
He also had the quality that I much admire in cats, of being able to basically curl up anywhere and fall sound asleep.
Really?
Yeah. I saw him sleeping in a filing center in China. I've seen him sleeping in the aisles of airplanes. I suspect he sleeps at his desk too, because his copy seems to flow so effortlessly as if from his subconscious.
I was always struck by how he seemed to always carry every single item of clothing that he owned on his back. That huge blue duffel bag that always looked like it was stuffed with hockey equipment.
Yeah, and he did take that suit with him pretty much wherever he went in case he had to interview the president. I guess the suit's probably getting a little ragged now, and it never did fit very well around the neck and shoulders, but I'm sure he's growing into it. As his stature increases, I think that suit will begin to fit. So I was thinking of China. We spent a lot of time together on a China trip, because we were basically, some of us were working 18, 20 hours a day because of the deadlines, and it really cut into John's sleeping time. But I remember we had seen, we'd gone to Xi'an and seen those fabulous terracotta warriors. We'd seen the grandeur of the Great Wall in Beijing and Tiananmen Square. We went through the gorges of the Yangtze River. And it was at that last stop, just before we went into Hong Kong, that Harris looked at me and delivered, what was a memorable two-word verdict on China, the people of, over 1,000 years of history, 1.2 billion people. And John looked at me and said, China basically sucks. So I don't think he'll be working there anytime soon. Perceptive.
Yeah, penetrating intellect.
Yeah. I wonder how John reacted to the recent spate of interviews that President Clinton gave, in which Clinton repeatedly named Ron Brownstein as the best White House correspondent.
I just assumed Clinton was trying to protect John.
Yeah, I think so too, because he mentioned that the president mentioned that he was afraid that it might hurt Brownstein's reputation to be known as the president's favorite reporter, but I think we all know who it really was, and it's a good thing that the president did protect him.
Well, it also occurred to me that he might actually think that John's name is Brownstein.
If you're a regular reader of the Washington Post, as I am, you might think that John Harris, White House correspondent, was a fixture here at the White House. Literally, almost every week or every other week, you can find columns and columns full of John Harris's thoughts about the White House, his opinions about the White House, and most of all, his analysis of what goes on inside the president's brain. But the odd thing is, we did a little survey here at the White House, and we couldn't find a soul who knew who he was. Let's cut to the tape.
John Harris, White House correspondent. I don't believe I've ever met him. Buddy, you hang around. Ever seen him?
Harris? I think he bought me a drink in L.A.
Yeah, that's the Washington Post's dedicated seat in the briefing room. You know, I have to tell you, I've been here a long time, since 1980, basically, and I've seen a lot of Washington Post reporters, great ones, come and go and sit in this chair. I mean, Ann Devroy, occasionally David Broder, Mary McGrory comes by once in a while. I mean, Woodward and Bernstein probably sat in the equivalent of this chair back when, but I haven't seen the latest Post reporter in a long time. Wait a minute, don't tell me, it's,
Ed.
no,
Ed Harris.
John Harris, right? Well, I don't know where he is. He never comes here.
John Harris? John Harris, let's see, wasn't he, John Harris, I think he was the fact checker for Peter Baker, the guy that did that Whitewater book. Yeah, that was him. And you know, that was a big step up though for John when he got to be fact checker, because he used to be the guy who would get Ann Devroy's laundry, pick that up. So it's big step up in life, big promotion. I don't know whatever happened to him though. We haven't seen him in a long time.
Harris? Yeah, I've read his stuff. A restaurant review, I think I saw somewhere.
Harris? I know that guy, Harris. He didn't even ask to have his hard pass renewed.
I think I remember John Harris back from Northfield, Minnesota. He went to St. Olaf, I think, but maybe Carleton. Anyhow, I think he called me once, but I would never talk to the guy. Never.
John Harris, he's everything that's wrong with the Washington press corps. He's so sincere. All he ever wants to do is talk about policy, policy, policy. I got no use for that guy.
Harris. John Harris. You know, I'm not really aware of a John Harris here covering the White House. I mean, we've seen a John Harris, but we do have at CNN a John Harris-like rule for covering presidential news conferences, which is always be there with your hair combed.
No, we don't like to talk about John Harris very much. You know, after all, we've got this mole in the Washington Post. David Levy put him on retainer so that anytime we needed a story in the Washington Post, we were to call John Harris. So I'll neither confirm nor deny that we know a John Harris.
Harris? Isn't he some kind of psychologist or a psychotherapist or something?